Population genetics describe the genetic structure of a population. In short, population genetics explains and studies how a group's genetic composition changes over time. Now, we have come to the second part of this topic. We are going to discuss Hardy-Weinberg law and the 5 assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg for genetic equilibrium. For further explanation on how to calculate allele and genotype frequencies will be discussed later. Hardy-Weinberg equation comes really close to predicting the genetic behavior. In other words, populations that are adhering to this assumption have two important properties. Their allele frequencies are stable and unchanging from generation to generation. Once in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, the genotype frequency are also stable from one generation to another after mating, and genotype frequency can be predicted from the allele frequency alone. Genotypes break down to alleles when gametes are formed. It is the alleles, not the genotypes, that are passed on to progeny. The Hardy-Weinberg model describes and predicts a balanced genetic equilibrium in the frequencies of alleles and genotypes within a freely interbreeding population, assuming a large population size, no mutation, no natural selection, no gene flow between populations, and random mating patterns. The main goal of population genetics is to understand and be able to predict the processes that shape and change a gene pool. Hardy-Weinberg equation is a mathematical model that explains the genetic behavior of large populations according to Mendel's law. More specifically, it allows you to predict the allele and genotype frequency in this population. Today's lecture is about why these assumptions are so important. We are going to see what are the effects on population as it pertains to allele and genotype frequency when these Hardy-Weinberg laws are broken. We are not going to focus on calculation today. Instead, you need to understand conceptually about how genetic equilibrium is achieved or not. Hardy-Weinberg tells us that our population must be infinitely large. Why? Only for large population size will be guaranteed to have every single allele existing in the gene pool will be passed on by reproduction to the next generation. Or in other words, the effect of chance on changing in allele frequencies is thereby greatly reduced. Just as only a large number of coin flips will you be guaranteed to have an equal number of heads and tails, exactly 50% head and 50% tails. What happens with very small population? Small populations have the potential for chance and randomness to skew the alleles that are involved in mating, to skew the alleles that make it to the next generation, and Hardy-Weinberg law prediction cannot be achieved. This is what we call as genetic drift. Now let's compare between very large population and small population of penguins. At the beginning, for both large and small population, the allele frequency for carrier that shows red phenotype appear to be 0.1 or 10%. But after natural disaster that caused the iceberg to break, the allele frequency for carrier in large population remained 0.9 or 9% compared to small population which has nil. This shows that in large population, allele frequencies are likely to remain constant. Genetic drift can be avoided, while in small population, allele frequencies may change drastically by chance alone. What is genetic drift? Genetic drift means changes in allele frequencies of a gene pool due to chance rather than selection by the environment. In small populations, random events can significantly alter allele frequencies. This random process is called genetic drift. Genetic drift occurs as the result of random fluctuation in the transfer of alleles from one generation to the next, which involve either bottleneck effect or the founder effect. A sudden, radically, and quickly decrease in population size is called a bottleneck effect, which gives rise to strong genetic drift when natural disaster occur. Founder effect, a small subset of an existing population, lives or sets off on its own and pioneers a new habitat which sets up a new population. It was a random event, happened by chance. The allele frequency of the new population will be the representative of the founder, the ones that founded this new colony, not the original population. Now let us review this video about genetic drift.
In this tutorial, we will talk about several topics in evolution: the founder effect, bottlenecking, and genetic drift. Our story begins with a small island and a small group of 7 people, 43% of which have an unattractive condition that causes them to be bald. Here is a section of the mainland population. The percentage of bald people is much lower, only about 10%. The small population of humans arrive on the secluded island far away from any mainland. Keep in mind that this group of people is a very inaccurate representation of the percentage of people in the normal population with this hairless condition. The small group of founders arrives on the island and begin to get to know one another. The small amount of humans procreates and procreates and procreates until their population grows to a number supported by the conditions on the island. As procreation continues, notice the increasingly high number of bald people.
After another survey of the population, we can see that there is a much higher percentage of bald people on the island. This is a result of the founder effect. Because the founders of the island had a much higher percentage of people with the genetic condition, and therefore their descendants do too. Suddenly, a natural disaster comes and wipes out all of the population, except for a few survivors. As the rubble is washed away and life begins to flourish on the island once again, the survivors begin to rebuild their population, with an even higher percentage of bald people than before. This is a result of bottlenecking. There was already a high percentage of the condition on the island before the disaster. When nearly all the population is wiped out, the survivors' genetics are passed on to their descendants, who represent an even higher percentage of the bald people than before the disaster. At this point, we have a smallish population inhabiting our fictional island. Due to the absence of natural disasters, the population exists freely. However, the factor of randomness has yet to be examined. As chance will have it, gradually more and more people with hair survive, and subsequently reproduce on the island. Especially due to the small population, the allele frequencies gradually change over time, resulting in a drift of phenotypes from bald to hairy.
The second assumption is random mating. Males and females may choose their mates using a variety of criteria such as color, body size, territory size, or display behavior. Random mating occurs when individual pairs by chance. There are 2 categories of non-random mating in any species. Positive assortative mating is when individuals tend to mate with others that are like them. Negative assortative mating is the opposite. as when individuals tend to mate non-randomly with partners that are not like them, example cats with different fur color. Inbreeding is a form of non-random mating. But unlike other non-random mating, inbreeding affects all genes instead of only affecting those genes contributing to the preferred phenotype. This will cause an increase in the number of homozygotes in general and decrease in the number of heterozygotes. New alleles for a gene come into being as a result of mutation, which is a change in the DNA of an individual. Mutations may have no effect, be beneficial, or can cause harm. In terms of fitness, new alleles have a chance to outform the existing alleles. Now, let's talk about the effect that migration has on these laws as well. According to Heidi-Weinberg equation, this predictive calculation of allele frequencies from generation to generation must be stable. Migration or gene flow brings a new or rare allele into the population that will cause changes in the allele frequency in the next generation. The allele frequencies must not be changed because of individuals with unusual allele frequencies leaving or entering the group. In other words, if these events happening from generation to generation, we cannot predict the frequency of dominant and recessive alleles because we can never know how many individuals are going to migrate. The fifth assumption of Hardy-Weinberg law, no natural selection. Natural selection breaks the rule of Hardy-Weinberg that cause population changes over time. In biological terms, nature selects those individuals most fit to survive. Over time, the process of natural selection leads to an increase in the frequency of good or beneficial genes in a population and a decrease in frequency of bad or harmful genes. When natural selection occurs, less favorable traits will become scarce or disappear from the population. Throughout this lecture, we can see how genetic composition has been changed over time by the forces of genetic drift, non-random mating, mutation, migration, and natural selection that can alter the allele frequencies. This is incredibly useful for understanding the real patterns that we see in the evolution of phenotypes and genomes. If the population did not achieve genetic equilibrium, the genotype frequency is not constant from generation to generation, and this will cause evolution to occur. In the next video, you will learn how to calculate allele and genotype frequencies.